Tonight's meeting, would you join me in the pledge of the flag, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Lynn, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Here.
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 Present. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting from May 5th.
Moved.
Second.
Any comments, questions, corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2 on the agenda is presentation on cannabis law and the town's options. Stacy and Nadine, you have the floor. We can't wait, so.
I'll just speak very, very briefly and let Stacy take over. This is Stacy Harris. She is an attorney with our office and has been doing a lot of work on presentations. And if there's anybody who is in attendance who would like a copy of that handout, we do have, and help yourself. We made extras for your information. So with that, very brief introduction. And again, as I had just mentioned a few moments ago, Stacy has slides. We'll go through those, but we can take it to the speed you want.
Absolutely, yes, thank you, Nadine. So everyone does have the presentation in front of them, so any slides you skip, any slides you have questions on, please let us know. Oh, should I?
Yeah.
They're the local cable access channel, so you're going to be a TV star.
Oh, wow, that's what I've been waiting for my whole life. As I was saying, we've all got the presentation, so if we skip any slides, if you have any questions, please let me know, let us know, and we can get those answered. Again, it's a lot of information, so we will, go into as much detail as you want, or give you as high level of view as you would like. So, with that said, we are going to talk about the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. I will refer to it as the MRTA. That is just a legislation that has made all of this happen and why I'm here today. It creates the cannabis law. It also amends many other aspects of law. It impacts the penal law, public health law, tax law, labor law. Some aspects of it we'll talk about have gone into effect immediately. That was on March 31st when it was signed into law. Other aspects that we'll also talk about have not gone into effect yet. Like, for example, the retail sales portion of it and the on-site establishment portion of it, that's not expected until at least 2022, maybe into 2023. Cannabis 101, these are just the definitions that are defined in the law. You can check this slide if anyone has any questions, you can go through it. But there's cannabis, there's hemp. Those are pretty much the two types that you need to be aware of. Cannabis law does create an entirely new section of the New York State government. The Office of Cannabis Management will be in charge of overseeing the entire program. And there are different boards and sections within the Office of Cannabis Management that you will be corresponding with. So the basics of the cannabis law are that adults 21 plus can now possess, use, transfer, etc., anything you can think of, up to 3 ounces of cannabis and 24 ounces of concentrated cannabis. Concentrated cannabis is one of those definitions. Think of what you would use in a vape or in an edible, something like that. Also, eventually, adults 21 plus may cultivate, harvest, keep within their personal residences 3 mature plants and 3 immature plants. Now, that is an aspect of law that does not go into effect yet. Importantly, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Home grow is what they call it. That cannot happen until 18 months after the first retail sale. So if anyone's trying to grow it now, that cannot happen. And you should be aware of that fact. That's not going to happen until probably 2023, 2024. It's also now prohibited to discriminate against individuals for engaging in conduct allowed under the cannabis law. And Obviously, cannabis can be sold to anyone 21 plus, but it's on the people who are selling it, not to sell it to anyone who is intoxicated. And generally, a good idea to keep in mind throughout this entire presentation is that the state really wants to treat cannabis like tobacco. So where smoking's allowed, smoking and vaping of tobacco is allowed. Right now, smoking and vaping of cannabis is allowed as well.
Okay, question.
Yes.
So a bar may have a smoking area. They can smoke a joint in a bar.
That is a good question. And actually, no, because there
Okay.
are
Oh,
some,
the Pollution Act, Air Pollution Act.
yes, well,
Okay.
so there's the Clean Indoor Air Act, which we will talk about. But the portion specific to smoking tobacco in a bar, there's some gray area just because there's some guidance that says if you sell alcohol, you cannot sell cannabis on the premises. They're gonna be separate. So to answer your question, no, at least. right
But
now.
an outdoor smoking area, they could?
I'm sorry, I apologize, because he's going back to consuming,
I believe he came to
not selling.
Yes.
I apologize.
No, that's a very good question. So you're talking more edible something like that?
Consuming, smoking,
Isn't this where they come
with related tobacco,
Mhm.
and we were talking about consuming and not related to his question. I apologize.
No, that's all right. So two parts. So, but outside of an establishment right now, yeah, technically that would be allowed. Consuming, that's an interesting question. And again, I should have prefaced my entire presentation with this. This law was passed with a lot of asterisks, meaning that a lot of guidance is going to come down the pipeline.
No.
So right now, with the whole consuming cannabis, how it's very difficult to tell if somebody's just eating a gummy bear or if somebody is ingesting an edible that is in the shape of a gummy bear, that's very hard to tell. And right now, it's gonna be very hard to prohibit that sort of behavior. It's more you just have to be aware that that could be occurring. But really, it's kind of focused on the smoking and the vaping, something that looks bad right now is what they're focusing on, the state is focusing on.
One follow-up question. Consumption is a town problem for consumption.
I'm sorry, could you give me a little more detail?
Oh, is it a town issue for consumption?
Consumption of cannabis?
Correct. Like liquor laws, is it a town problem? Or if somebody has a drink, is it a town issue?
That is,
This is why we're in the town.
right, absolutely.
Okay, and.
That is a very good question. And yes, so there are some actions that the town may take pursuant to consuming and smoking cannabis, which is why we're here and we're going to try to explain that tonight. It's limited in some of the actions that may be taken, but at least right now there are some options that a town or a village or a city may take to curb smoking, vaping, consuming of cannabis. But it cannot be prohibited completely.
Why don't you just keep it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Stick
and
to
then
the
some of these
program.
questions may kind of be fleshed out as you go.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked, well, I'm so sorry, so the public consumption, which probably goes to your question. So like I said, and this was your question as well, we'll speak through this slide, smoking and vaping of cannabis is prohibited anywhere where smoking or vaping of tobacco is not allowed right now. That's because cannabis was added to the Clean Air Act. Of course, the Clean Air Act is a baseline of prohibitions. So the state is allowing local governments, that includes you, that you can impose your own vaping and smoking restrictions right now, whether that be in more indoor places prohibited than under the Clean Air Act, or you can also issue restrictions for property that you own or control, think parks, playgrounds, things of that nature. But again, important to keep in mind, violations are only a civil penalty, and you cannot exceed $25 for 20 hours of community service.
Is that per
Violation.
violation?
Mhm. Yes, correct. And also, the state already says that cannabis cannot be smoked or vaped on school grounds within 100 feet of entrances or exits of schools or public libraries, and in or on school buses, except if that is occurring on somebody's private residence, with the 100 feet rule. So we talked about this briefly already, but the personal cultivation and home possession. Again, home possession starts now, personal cultivation does not. That does not happen again until 18 months after the first retail sale of cannabis occurs in the state. But importantly, local municipalities, including counties in this one, can enact and enforce certain regulations pertaining to this. So the state rule is an individual 21 plus can grow 3 mature and 3 immature plants. And that's capped at 6 per household. So if you have, a group of friends living together, it can only be 6 and 6. A town could, for example, say, no, you can only do one mature plant, 1 immature plant, 2, something like that, as long as you don't ban it completely. Talk briefly about this medical cannabis. It just puts the medical cannabis program under the cannabis law, expands it a great deal, and also adds it as a disability under the ADA, so that has some labor and employment implications. But again, it's an asterisk, just something to be aware of at the moment. So licensing, we'll speed through these sort of sections. It's just important to remember that the licensing will be allowed for cultivating, processing, distributing, delivering, dispensing, operating a cooperative, operating a micro business, operating a nursery, or operating what they are calling an on-site consumption establishment. This kind of goes back to what I was saying with you cannot go to a bar and smoke a joint. The equivalent of what the bar is this on-site consumption establishment. You'll be able to go buy some, smoke it there.
So what about, can I just ask that, a current cigar bar couldn't already expand to include smoking cannabis, or?
In theory, yes, but they would have to qualify for a license and go through that license application.
Okay.
And these are state licenses,
Yes.
correct?
We'll talk about it a little bit later, but local municipality cannot develop their own local licensing system. There is a small option for you in terms of licensing. I think that's coming up. Yes. Notification to local governments of license applications. So like I said, it's state licenses. But before an applicant applies for the license, they have to notify the local municipality in which that license will be. And so there's a deadline there. It's more than 30 days before they file the application, but not more than 270 days. They have to let you know that they're going to be filing that. And then what that gives you the opportunity to do is write to the Cannabis Control Board and say, hey, we support this for the following reasons, or say, we don't support this application being granted for the following reason. And then what they have to do, the Office of Cannabis Management has to take that, make it part of the record. And then once it's part of the record, it will go to whether or not they grant the application. They have to then give notification to the local municipality of how that was taken into consideration in making their decision.
Yeah, because that would affect the zoning.
Absolutely, and zoning is a big part of this as well, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but local municipalities can pass zoning regulations about the retail and on-site consumption establishments.
But municipalities do not have to send some sort of letter either in favor or opposed.
No, they do
Okay.
not. It's just purely something that gives you some control, if any, over what kind of applications are being granted in your vicinity.
Is there any number of licenses that will be issued for, say, a town of our size?
They have not given any sort of maximum or minimum number, but that is a factor that goes into the decision-making process, is how many licenses there are already, of what type. I believe, yes, it's on the next page. So some factors, you guys are so good at segueing.
I'm sorry. No.
And it shows that you're.
And we didn't even get this before.
You seem to be hitting everything as you go along.
I know, right, we
It's
all,
like 2 slides on 1 page, isn't it? So then you can see.
we're cheating.
There are several factors that kind of a municipality is affected by, that the Cannabis Control Board will make their decisions. Like I said, number, classes, and character of the licenses already in the municipality, whether there's a demonstrated need. They'll also take into account pedestrian and vehicular traffic, noise issues, and really because the whole spirit of the cannabis law is this sort of like social and public benefit good, they're also going to, in theory, take that into account.
The only thing I will say on that is the state has a number of uses where they regulate them and they determine whether or not an area is saturated. For example, group homes. Group homes is something that the state regulates and they allow, and you have to have an application go in, and municipalities get aware of them, right? We have a municipality where they literally in a 2-mile area have over 30 group homes. And the state has never given an opinion that that's too many. So they have criteria, but they will decide how to apply it. And they don't, there's no regulations, especially now. But I would anticipate, using the group home example, if you look up, if you ever try to challenge a group home application as a municipality, there is no case law against it because they regulate them and they handle the appeals and everything. So some of this is,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how they apply them. But anyways. keep going.
Absolutely, no, I think that's a very good point, because the thing is, of the way it was passed, there are a lot of, it sounds good, but it will have to play out how it's actually, going to be. So, how this may affect you, we have some taxes and state funded programming. There's a whole new section of the tax law, which is always fun. But we'll skip over that and give you the necessary details. It'll be taxed at the distribution level, which does not have an impact at the local level, but there will be a tax at the sale level as well. So the MRTA establishes a 13% excise tax on retail sales, and that's split with 9% going to the state, 4% going to the local county and municipality. Of course, depending on how many sales are actually done, that will seriously impact the amount that the town or other municipality receives.
Better
There are
deal
no
than
real
speeding
projections
tickets.
right now on what that number will be. There was, I think Governor Cuomo issued a statement that said they're expecting 3.5 million in tax revenue, but that of course is distribution, retail, doesn't break it down at all, but may give you an idea.
So what would the split be between the county and the municipality?
It's 3-1.
Yeah.
3 for us, 1 for the county?
Right, but I actually have a follow-up on that, because we have a village within our, did I just take you to the next slide?
It was so close. Okay, so, let's see. You did not take me. Oh man, I was gonna be so excited. You took me 2 slides later.
Sorry.
Okay. So, just quickly before we get to that, importantly for you, at least right now, there are no restrictions on how the local governments need to use those local revenues that they receive from cannabis sales. But if a municipality chooses to opt out, which we will get to, you do not receive any revenue from whether you opt out from one or the other or both.
So if we opt out of one of them, we don't get any revenue.
That's not true. I'm sorry, I did say that very confusingly. If you opt out of one, you don't get revenue from that one.
From that one.
Yeah, but
Right,
if you opt out of both, you
Right.
don't get revenue from either.
right.
Meaning sale versus consumption?
Right.
Okay, just checking.
Yep, that's the way I understood it.
So now to that slide, the distribution of that local sales tax revenue, that will be controlled by the state controller. In theory, this is supposed to happen quarterly. So counties, the controller will give the money to the county. The county then keeps 25% of that, and then the other 75% of that 4%, so 3%, I guess you could say, goes to the local municipalities who made the sale. So now, your question. So if a retail dispensary is in a village that also allows, the town allows it as well, what will happen is, what we recommend too, is that there should be an agreement. You have to have an agreement of how that money will be split. If not, it will be split 50-50 between the town and the village if they both allow it.
Not according to population, 50-50.
Yeah.
Well, then
Unless
there's,
there's an agreement.
Well, and then, so we would also need the village of Baldensville,
To agree to it.
right? So if.
And they will know that if they don't agree to it, they're going to get half.
Wait, say that again, Nadine, I'm sorry.
So,
If they opt out, which means that we couldn't.
well, if they opt out, then they're,
They don't get any money. It will just be the town money if the village opts out.
Okay, so that's what I want, so the village opts out, then, and we decide to opt in, we would allow these, and decide we would allow 4 retail shops, I'm just making stuff up right now, but it would all be outside the village, ergo, the village would get none of that 3%.
Correct.
Okay,
But it's based on sales in that population.
Right.
and then if the village does opt in, and does it, do we share just what, if there's one dispensary in the village and the other 3 are in the town outside the village, how does that get?
In theory, I see what you're asking. That's not provided for in the law right now. Coming down the pipeline,
but that would probably be what you'd want to address in your agreement.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the agreement would be, look at what takes place in the village, we share. Out of the village, we don't share. And then you can try to figure out what the distribution is within the village.
Yes.
Well, and is that just our side of the village since it's split?
Yes.
Right.
We also have
okay.
2 towns sharing a village.
You had to make it easy, didn't you?
Perfect storm.
Lysander anyway.
That's actually, for the comptroller, just logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like-
Absolutely. But getting into the whole opting
Can't
out
even believe this
question,
is happening.
we went through all those different types of licenses before. Opting out, though, a municipality can only choose to opt out of the retail sale dispensaries or the on-site consumption establishment. You cannot opt out of any of the other types of licenses. You cannot prohibit cannabis, business in your municipality, just those 2 types of cannabis business. You already covered you can't develop your own local license system. Okay, so the opt-out. So, how do you opt out? You opt out by adopting a local law subject to a permissive referendum on or before December 31st, 2021. No opt-out, you cannot, for the future at all, no opt-out may occur after December 31st, 2021. So if you're thinking you want to do it, that's what has to happen before that December 31st date. You can always opt back in by amending or repealing that local law. And importantly, that local law only needs to be adopted by December 31st, 2021. The referendum can take place after. So those are the important deadlines to keep in mind. Covered that. And we talked about this briefly. A town opt-out only applies to the town surrounding the village. It does not, if the town opts out, it does not force the village within that town to opt out as well. And vice versa.
Just saying.
That's good.
So how do you perform that
what he
opt-out
said.
specifically? So the law requires that a permissive referendum has to occur pursuant to Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 24. And that means that a local law is not effective until 45 days after its adoption has passed. If 45 days have passed and a petition hasn't been filed, then that law has been enacted. But if a petition is filed and there is the process for the filing that goes on there, it must be submitted at the next general election of the state or local level, or that petition can also request that a special election be held. Other options for you, if you decide to go through with this and you opt in, you have the option, like we talked about, of passing some zoning regulations. So local governments may pass laws and regulations governing the time, place, and manner and operation of the retail dispensaries and on-site consumption establishments. But you can't make the operation of those establishments unreasonably impractical.
Just to bring up a point, one of the questions that had been raised beforehand was whether or not the town by its own motion could make it subject to mandatory referendum. So,
Yeah, Fayetteville, Manlius.
villages.
Villages can, towns and cities cannot. And that is because municipal home rule law, fun little law, it gives a village, it says you can perform a permissive referendum subject to the village law, Article 9, which allows that sort of process to happen. There's no language in Home Rule Law, Section 24, that gives the same option for towns or cities.
Is that because towns and counties are created under the Constitution and cities and villages are chartered or incorporated?
You know, that is an excellent question, and I don't have an answer to that.
Probably.
I would guess you're right,
You sound
Who cares?
but it sounds,
He drafted that
Good
comment.
point.
I had to ask.
Howard was a consultant on that.
Yeah.
We'll loop back with you whether that's the case. Okay, so like I said, you can pass some zoning regulations. Let's see. Also, they all have to subscribe to those zoning regulations that are already passed, special use permits, site plan approvals, things like that. There's not much about sort of zoning and operations in the cannabis law itself. There is a rule about signage, that the Cannabis Control Board actually authorizes signage of dispensaries.
probably the important language there is that you can't make your zoning regulations unreasonably impracticable. That's the key. You can't effectively zone them out because you've put so many regulations on them.
Right, but we can't control, since we control the size of signs for businesses, we can't control the size of the sign for these properties, for these businesses?
That's interesting. I'll have to check with the Cannabis Control Board because the thing is, the way it's written is that they are controlling signage right now, but if there's already some local zoning regulations, then I'm guessing that they would have to abide by those as well.
Or maybe
I can-
managing
Well,
word
I-
language on the
I'm not
sign.
sure. I suspect that's one with an asterisk, because there's very few municipalities that don't have signage regulations, right? Every single one of them does. So I would submit that the fact that they included specifically the exemption for signage, that they're going to have some specific, and where that also probably, it may, depending upon how they choose to enforce it or how they choose to apply those rules, it may be a good thing, because as we know, regulating signage is a nightmare because of the freedom of speech. And if you all of a sudden pass specific regulations just for cannabis, it is going to be a free speech issue. So it may actually be a good thing that they are looking at it and having that as part of their licensing process. We'll have to see. There's the asterisk.
Okay.
I can see billboards on 690.
No, no, no.
Not in Van Buren.
No, no, no.
It's not right now. And then also importantly within the law is that dispensaries and on-site consumption establishments cannot be located within 500 feet of school grounds or 200 feet of a house of worship. It's already in there. I don't have to describe it. Quickly, seeker, not that interesting, but important. Any law that you pass or adopt, it has to be subject to seeker if it affects the environment. Chances are, it'll be an unlisted action, negative declaration.
They don't care about the people, they just care about the environment.
Clean air supervisor.
Oh, man.
Separate cemeteries.
Promotes clean
Maybe
air,
allowed
right?
to put
Okay.
stuff in bags.
Couple other provisions that affect municipalities. There is a police right to inspect licensed operations. Importantly, you cannot do it to compromise the licensee's safety and security or interrupt ordinary business. But those inspections can occur for things like making sure they are in compliance with state and local regulations, as well as those
That'd be our
building
codes
codes,
guy.
fire, health,
No.
everything we talked
Nothing?
about.
Question, since
Inspection.
we do not have a police force here, the sheriff's department takes control, so
So.
they would have to go do it.
Yeah, so I did leave this out. So it's the Office of Cannabis Management, any authorized representative of the Cannabis Control Board, as well as local peace and police officers, so the sheriff would be handling that. since you don't have-
Well, the second bullet there under
Yeah,
that,
that's what I was
the
gonna say.
codes enforcement officer, is he authorized to go in and do these inspections? for-
Yes,
I would say,
it would be no
Okay.
different than any other use that
Right.
has code
Okay.
violations. You need reason. I mean,
Right.
he can't go into any place and just say, well, he can inspect them, I don't mean it that way, but as far as if you have a real concern that there's some kind of a health, safety, and welfare issue with a code violation, at minimum, you can always get a search warrant to go check if you need to. So that's not going to change.
And not necessarily pertinent to the town, but any chief of police, police officer, any elected village official who manages the police department, again, not really pertinent to you, but something to keep in mind, they can't have anything to do with the cannabis business. It's similar to the beverage law that's in effect right now, but they can't like have their hand in any sort of cannabis dealing. Traffic safety, use of cannabis by drivers will remain prohibited, and it carries with it the same penalties as it did previously, so DUI. State Department of Health is working on some sort of test for driving under the influence of cannabis. Good. But right now, it really sort of depends on what is observable to an officer. We touched on this actually a little bit before the presentation. There are some impacts on labor and employment issues. You're barred from discriminating against individuals for legal cannabis use. And then also, but Nadine did mention this earlier, there are some carve-outs to that. So if you receive state or federal funding and that is in jeopardy, then you can continue to take adverse action if somebody tests positive for cannabis, or if there's anything pursuant to a state or federal regulation that requires like testing or adverse actions based on cannabis use. The CDL example was the one that was given. You can continue to do that. Or if an employee is impaired on the job. But again, how do you test for impairment? The law did something fun where they gave you a phrase and then didn't define it. So they said that you need to look for specific articulable symptoms.
Which they did not articulate.
But would they be similar to alcohol?
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
Or I
Slurred
wonder,
speech, staggered, things like that.
what has like a Colorado, Oregon, or Washington State done? Nothing to date to, I mean, I would think they've had
I believe-
laws on the books for 6
Aren't we the
years.
15th state?
Yeah.
So there when there's 14 before us, I'm sure they've started to flesh some of this out. Our state just has not yet adopted any of that however, to your point, I think if the other 14 states all say that these are articulable symptoms and you were to rely on them in the absence of our own state guidance, I think that's persuasive.
Absolutely. Another aspect of the law that will have to play out eventually is that the New York State law does not include any sort of carve-out for safety-specific occupations right now. So a lot of the cannabis laws in other states do. The New York City one actually does as well, but the state chose not to include that yet. So, I mean, eventually it will probably happen. I don't really see how it won't, but it will probably have to play out in the courts. Another important aspect of the cannabis law is that employees cannot make any sort of hiring, firing, disciplinary decision purely based on a positive test for cannabis alone. Except for, again, those sort of carve-outs that we mentioned earlier. So that means that you'll probably see a lot of employers just choosing to do away with the testing for cannabis entirely, because if you can't really use it.
Other than CDL.
Right, other than those specific carve-outs we talked about earlier, or other federal or state regulations that require the testing.
Or if somebody drives a town vehicle, would that be, but it doesn't have to be a CDL license. It would be similar to somebody driving under the influence of prescription medicine or alcohol.
Well, I think you'd have to, again, have reason to test them. I mean, if you got somebody who's a habitual smoker, or user, I guess is perhaps the right term, they may be able to use and drive, and nobody knows the difference. And it may not actually have impaired their driving, as opposed to somebody who's never done it before or whatever, You're still
This is
stuck in
gonna affect our insurance now that, though. Anyway.
Well, they haven't played into it yet either, insurance companies.
If it's not prescribed by at the state or federal level, then you really need other aspects other again, though, the cannabis law doesn't prohibit testing entirely. It just can't be your only evidence if none of those other exclusions apply. And again, as I mentioned, the use of medical cannabis is now deemed a disability under the executive law and civil rights law. So employers are going to have to take into consideration reasonable accommodation and things like that. Quickly, we'll read through this. Heck of a slide. So criminal justice totally redoes the penal law in terms of cannabis use. Completely reduces penalties for possession, anything like that. It's pretty much just fines from here on out. Also impacts law enforcement practices. So there are aspects of cannabis use that can no longer be used as reasonable suspicion in investigations. The one that really matters right now is the odor of cannabis or odor of burnt cannabis. There's one time where that can be used for reasonable suspicion in an investigation, and that is when the investigation is into whether a driver is operating a vehicle under the influence. So if you smell it, if you smell burnt cannabis, that police officer who stopped a driver on the side of the road can use that to then search the vehicle for evidence. Importantly, you can really only search the areas of the vehicle that are accessible by the driver. And again, there are aspects of cannabis use that are made illegal. But again, that's like under the age of 21, carrying over 3 ounces, and when home use is allowed, that you can have 5 pounds on your private residence. So if it's over 5 pounds, but again, those are allowed as civil penalties.
And Nadine and I had this discussion a couple weeks ago. A few ounces of weed is a lot of stuff.
It's a lot.
And talking 5 pounds, that's a lot of stuff. So.
Well, then 3 ounces is a Ziploc full. I thought of it like baking.
Like a
3 ounces is not a lot when you're baking, at least the little chocolate squares they are, but 3 ounces, I've asked. And then also I found out, because I will fully embrace the fact that I am not a pot smoker, 5 pounds is like a backpack size. The people I know who use even can't believe the amount. And to put it into further perspective, what I shared with the supervisor, the person I was speaking with is a rather habitual user. Maybe doesn't smoke daily, but probably 5 days a week, and made the comment, well, here's a question you can't answer, Mr. Supervisor, because I've already shared this with you, but how much do you think a habitual user would go through in a week?
10 pounds.
No.
No.
It's 5 ounces.
An eighth of an ounce.
An eighth?
1/8 of an ounce. So the person I was speaking with was like, do you have any idea how long 3 ounces last? He's like, that's insane. See, and for a non-user, you don't understand that. Do you know what I
Where
mean?
does it
Yeah, it's
sell
loose.
that it becomes an intent to sell? I mean, that's
5
not
pounds of
gone,
backpack.
I mean,
said
5
7
pounds.
pounds.
I don't know if it matters. I mean, I'm not sure they care.
You can't, but that it is illegal to sell on the personal level. But they're really putting that onus on the retail salesman, that if you're noticing somebody coming in way more than should be happening, then that's maybe evidence of intent to sell, and they have duties to report that sort of activity.
Andy, you got a quick comment?
Now, what's a pound of sugar look like? 1 pound of sugar.
That's a
About a
5-pound
quart
bag.
jar.
That's a
That's
5-pound
a
bag.
5-pound bag.
Yeah.
Times 5. You're allowed to have 5 pounds of pot.
That'd be like a backpack, that's what she said.
That's like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to carry that.
Yeah, well,
So that's the context, and the only thing I want to bring back to you is it a town problem, or is the state liquor authority a problem? If we need more a state liquor authority law, that we should, I think we should focus on it and put the onus on the state to regulate this consumption of this product. And this is a presentation,
yeah.
because, yeah, sure, we're talking about tax dollars and this and that, and maybe it's all inevitable. maybe it is. But the fact is, if the law says 5 pounds of compressed marijuana, that's a lot of drugs, and that's a concern.
So to your point, yes, it is a state issue, and I think the state is intentionally taking it on more for themselves to prevent local municipalities from having that say. Because I believe, and perhaps some of this is speculative, but I believe they feel that if they leave too much power within the hands of the local municipalities, they're not going to have significant change that they want. Significant change being the allowance of this use, the allowance of the sale, the allowance of the distribution, and whatever. So it is a state issue, and that I would submit to you as part of the reason why in that procedure that Stacy was just referring, when it says a municipality is placed on notice of an application. They can't deny it, they can't approve it, they're just told, oh, by the way, you have an application. And you are allowed the opportunity to submit comments, concerns, objections, support, whatever. But essentially, the state's retaining that control and is not allowing the municipality. So part of the point of tonight is there's a lot of misconception about what a municipality can and cannot do with this new law. They're really very limited, they being the town. The town is very limited in how they are allowed to regulate cannabis use, cannabis sales, cannabis distribution within the town. So yes, it is still a state issue.
Let's segue, go backwards. Can the town actually say, no, we're done with it?
No. That was what she said. Nope, you can't even regulate it in a zoning capacity to try to obliterate it. No.
It cannot be prevented. There are only certain aspects that can be managed within the town. So for example, that 5-pound number we were talking about, the way the law is written, the local municipality can't pass a law dealing with that 5-pound number. That 5-pound maximum is the number. What they do have the control over is that 3 mature, 3 immature plant maximum. Again, can't be 0, but that's all right now the local municipality has control over in terms of personal cultivation. So really it's the state has made the decision, the state really has the control, the local municipality just has some ways that it can vary the way it's occurring within their town.
So this was intended to provide you some overview, some information, so that you can think about how this town wants to use what regulation authority it has. And essentially, as we spoke about a little while ago, it's almost like a 2-tier. First hurdle, if you will, is for you to decide whether or not the town is going to opt out of either of those initial,
Retail, dispensary, or on-site consumption establishment.
so that's what you have right now. That would be the first hurdle. Once you figured out whether or not you're opting out of something or not, if you're going to stay in, then you can figure out how you want to regulate it. But
And they're two separate, so you would opt
Yep.
out of both, opt out of one, opt out of the other.
You got it.
Opt into both.
you can split the baby. A horrible saying, but you can do that. So we just wanted to be able to provide the board with some information. I know the board's already said this is nothing that you're making a decision on tonight, but we just wanted to be able to give you this so that you have a little bit more of an opportunity to be comfortable with knowing what you can do.
Well, it was edifying, so
Thank
we
you for your
appreciate it.
presentation.
Thank you,
You did a
Stacy.
nice
Great,
job,
great.
Stacy.
We expect we probably will make a decision within the next month on whether we're staying in or opting out or what we're doing, so, and then we'll go from there with the rest of it, so.
Sounds good?
And the local law, if we opt out, has to be done by the end of the year, and then the comments after can take up to 45 days after.
Not comments. No,
That's the permissive
Permissive.
any kind of referendum. Your referendum does not need to occur before the 31st of December. You only need to take action as a board and approve, approve any local law that may be subject to referendum.
And the petition, the 45 days you were talking about is if a petition is not filed to trigger that referendum
Then
within
it's law.
45 days,
It's
then the law has
approved.
been enacted.
Can I get a couple extra ones, one for Wendy and an extra one, and also what you gave to the public, a couple of those?
You already have that, but
Okay, that's the same one that these other ones are in here. Okay, very good. Just two of those.
Do you need
Yeah.
one for your,
Maybe one for codes guy? I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, that might
Yeah,
help
it's fine.
too, yeah.
If you want them all, we don't care. It doesn't matter. We-
No, you might have other clients, we don't need them all. Okay, very good, thank you.
And then I just want to make sure I totally have my head around this too. You can opt in, if you've opted out of both, or one or the other, you can eventually opt in later. Okay. Just wanna
Absolutely.
Be clear on that.
You have one bite at the apple to opt out. That's it.
All right.
You can always opt in. If you opt out in November or December, and then in March go, oh, we want to opt in, you can,
Through another local law.
through another local law. Correct.
Okay,
You have one hit at the
Appreciate
pipe to opt out, though,
we know more now, for sure.
as opposed to bite at the apple.
Okay. We thank you, very good, Stacy. Okay, item number 2 is consider resolution outlining the benefits and conditions of employment for the town's mechanic position. You have that in front of you. It's got a 5/19 date on it. You know, it outlines the things to be pertinent and applicable to the mechanic's position, since that is now a non-union position. So I'd entertain a motion to adopt this resolution.
Move.
Second.
Discussion?
This is in, the same as any other non-union employee for the town.
Right. This will be made an addendum to the handbook to outline for future people. You know, we're not all going to be here forever, and this will get amended to the handbook so people down the road will know what was approved. Any other discussion?
Yep.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3 is appointment of Jennifer Smiley as Recreation Supervisor with the Parks Department effective June 1st, 2021, with residency required within 90 days of appointment with compensation as dictated by the collective bargaining agreement. Entertain a motion to that effect?
Moved.
Second.
I don't think the residency is going to be a problem. They have put a purchase offer on a house in Van Buren, so so we expect a closing, and they'll probably move before that 90 days is up. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 is consider resolution modifying the Warner Cemetery rules and regulations. You have before you a document dated May 7th. Consider rule change for item 9 of the Warner Cemetery rules and regulations. You have the existing language there. You have what the proposed language is. We ran into a problem where they wanted to put more remains in cemetery plots than there would be room for monument stones to be placed. Every person that gets buried is entitled to a monument stone to be placed on a plot. So if you get more than 2 in any one slot, it's difficult to have, you know, if you had a casket burial and then 2 cremations on top, you're talking 3 stones in one slot. That's a lot of stones, and it makes it more difficult to mow around and maintain and everything else. So we're trying to limit those to no more than 2 sets of human remains shall be interred in one grave spot. The 2 sets can only be comprised of 1 casket burial and 1 cremation burial, or 2 cremation burials. In the event that the cremation burial occurs first, said burial must be placed in a removable container which would allow for relocation on top of the casket burial. If the 2 persons are placed in the same burial plot, only 1 marker, existing or new, will be allowed with a double inscription. The purpose of this regulation is to be able to allow for proper memorialization. Cremated remains shall not be permitted to be scattered in the cemetery, which was in the old language. So that's what we're proposing to change the language to. So I'd entertain a motion to that effect.
I'll make that.
Second.
Any more discussion?
Makes sense.
we as the town control what happens.
Right, that got turned over to us several years ago.
Are we still selling new plots?
No, no, we haven't sold a plot since we took it over.
Okay. Are most of the plots still being paid for to be cared for in perpetuity?
No, we don't receive nothing.
Okay.
There's no perpetual care fund or anything.
It's all gone.
It's gone when we took it.
But we do keep track of where they are and all that.
Yeah,
Should
we
people
still
wanna
have all the
burials
maps
in the
and who's
cemetery.
buried where and that type of thing. If somebody wants to be buried there, they come to Lynn, and then Lynn gets John involved, and we figure it out according to the
So
records we
it's
have.
their paperwork that shows ownership?
Yes, and we're, obviously, if there's new people buried there, we update the mapping to reflect that.
Are there plots still open, available?
No, I don't, we aren't selling any, but there's slots open down there, yeah. Somebody paid for them along the way. They have to prove that they're descendant. Okay? Any more discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I have a pencil in number 5 is approve the placement of a hydrant 625 feet east of Pottery Road by Aqua. Expenses paid for by the developer. This is to provide fire protection for Alltech. You remember we approved stuff a couple of weeks ago for them. This is a standard thing we do. The water district was expanded, and this is the extension of the line, and we have to approve the fire hydrant to be added in with the extension. And entertain a motion to approve the placement of the hydrant.
Moved.
Second.
Any more discussion? Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Counselor Committee Reports and Comments, MF.
Okay, there is a cable franchise meeting with FiOS coming up this Monday afternoon. It's with the village, the town, and Lysander as well. And secondly, I met, I'm sorry?
What time?
4, I believe. I can email you that. And I met with FiOS installation people last week up at Condo 3, and we took photos, sent it to, I'm sorry, we met at Condo 6, where they have installed conduit into those condos, and we sent pictures of that to both condos 2 and 3 for them to approve the exterior wiring on the buildings, and they still have to run the actual main cables into both 2, 3, and 4, but at least there is movement finally, and I don't know when that is going to get done, but it will be brought up in negotiations with FiOS. That's it.
Pat?
I'd like to thank Parks and Grounds and John and his crew. Mulch was spread on the Harbor Heights playground, and it was sorely needed, so the residents have mentioned how appreciative they are. And also, just point of information, I'm on the beautification committee with the Beeville Garden Club, and tomorrow morning we are planting the big planters, so they will be set out amongst the village streets and cared for by Garden Club members throughout the summer as far as weeding and whatever. And the village obviously is going to water them, and baskets are going up also. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to start, but I think everything will be in place by Memorial Weekend.
Good.
So I'd just like to, thank those that have purchased a basket.
I was just going to ask you, are there more
Supported it.
available for purchase?
Yes, always. So, thank you.
Okay. Ron?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Doug and Jason. When we had our highway committee meeting this spring, up in the park, I had noticed that when there was sledding and everything going on, that we needed to make some room up there to get some of these cars off the road. There was quite a few out there. And Doug and Jason looked at it, and Doug has been up there now, and anybody that does happen to go up in the park, up in that upper end, you're gonna see piles of dirt and all this going on, where him and his department are gonna go up through there and try to make access a little bit more for the winter time, for getting cars off the road. Thanks, Doug.
Anything else?
Nope.
Darcy?
Nothing this evening.
Howard?
Nothing.
Okay. Doug?
Just add that, actually, the buildings and grounds, I know did several other playgrounds also. because,
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We had a couple guys help them with, dump trucks to just deliver
Oh,
stuff. So
okay.
I know they worked for many, many days doing more than just the harbor ice, like, they put fuel in.
Good.
That it?
Claude,
Yeah.
I have one more thing. The Land Use Committee met this past Monday, and the sole discussion was about the parking of boats, recreational vehicles on town streets. And basically, it's been the sheriff that has been handling that matter. There is still existing language in our code that does prohibit parking of RVs, boats, trailers, whatever, on town streets. So again, it's a safety issue. If you have it out there, just please make sure that it does not impact somebody's ability to drive very easily in sight distance. Thank you.
So Land Use Committee's not gonna take any additional action or
No,
anything?
there's
Okay.
nothing that needs to be
Right.
done.
Okay. The only thing I have, there's a webinar tomorrow at noon with the Association of Towns. MF and I have registered to attend that. It's on the American Rescue Plan. More guidance has been issued, but it's still sketchy. At least all the supervisors yesterday thought it's still sketchy. So I guess we gotta wait for Association of Towns and probably more to come from the federal government. But this board will need to decide what we're gonna use that money for going forward here. So we'll have more to report after the webinar, and you'll probably get an email on it, just what we learned, at least the highlights. So citizens' comments, anyone wishing to address the board?
It's the only one left.
Okay,
I
Jason?
thought this was an exciting night. Sorry, Jason.
Okay, Nadine?
I think Costello has said enough tonight. I have nothing else unless the board has any questions.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session, discuss an employee labor matter.
Moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We don't expect any action when we come out. You're welcome to hang around if you want, but no action is expected, so thank you for coming.
I mean, I can go.
And we can go into the conference room.